This is CBC Here and Now.
This is still a good vaccine. It's still an effective vaccine. And these are very rare events that are happening.
The AstraZeneca vaccine is on hold for people under the age of 55 after new advice from Health Canada.
But health officials say the vaccine is still recommended for people 55 and older.
A windy start to the week this week. We're going to see these winds die down eventually as we head through the overnight, and then a little bit of a stretch of some quiet weather.
Andrew Furey and the Liberals have a fresh mandate, a slim majority. So what's next? Well, that's up to our newly elected political leaders. But union and business leaders say they want to be heard.
Every decision is made. They got to have a seat at the table.
I'm Terry Roberts. We'll have that story coming up on Here and Now.
Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. I'm Peter Cowan.
And I'm Carolyn Stokes.
Well, there are no new cases of COVID-19 in the province today, and just 2 active cases in total, one in the Eastern Health region and one in Central. But things are changing when it comes to the vaccine, specifically who will get the AstraZeneca version. They're pausing using the doses for people under the age of 55. So far, about 4,000 people have been given doses of AstraZeneca in this province, mostly first responders. The move comes from the federal panel looking at vaccines and their safety. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Janice Fitzgerald said people over the age of 55 can continue to receive it. The issues that they've had with blood clots were reported in younger people. Anyone who received a shot will get a letter telling them what symptoms to look for, but there have been no reported issues in Canada.
What you have to remember is that out of the millions of doses of this vaccine that have been given around the world, we are still talking about very few cases. So the chance of someone having this kind of reaction is still quite low. We certainly would ask that people watch out for those side effects.
Now, what's this going to do with the speed of the vaccination plan? Well, Dr. Fitzgerald said they're still on track, but the health minister warned there might be a couple-week delay. They're hoping to have new information before those 4,000 people need to get their second doses.
Well, we started off the week stormy, certainly seeing lots of snow, or at least some snow, some ice pellets, even rain. But the big story really is the windy conditions earlier today, or really through most of the day today. We're starting to see some of that heavy rain move across the Avalon, and then things should taper off as we head through the night tonight. But take a look at these pictures. This was Category 1 hurricane force gusts from Cal White. He took these photos in St. George's, ripped the roof right off, some siding of a house as well, and then a number of downed trees being reported for the West Coast. So certainly seeing those windy conditions. We do have that wind warning in place across the island that will generally continue. We're starting to see some of the strongest winds right now in eastern areas. If you take a look at those numbers there, 100 km/h winds for Bonavista, and then those strong winds really across Green Island, Pass Island, all in those 120 km/h range. So those winds, like I said, will ease, but I'll break that down for you coming up.
Well, now that Premier Andrew Furey and his Liberals have a fresh mandate with their slim majority win on Saturday, what's next? Business and union leaders say when the new government gets ready to tackle the finances, they want a say on how it's done. Here Now's Terry Roberts explains.
So one big question is whether there will be massive job cuts. Premier Andrew Furey has said that's not his intention, and the province's biggest public sector union says it's something it won't tolerate.
I am going to stand up for our workers in every fashion possible.
Groups like Ndp are using words like collaboration to confront the daunting challenges faced by the province. Open dialogue that includes public sector workers.
Because frontline workers have a lot to offer and they can contribute immensely to the problems that lie ahead. Their suggestions need to be heard.
We will be looking for swift action.
It's a similar message from business leaders.
We all have a vested interest in making decisions and taking action that put Newfoundland and Labrador in a direction of prosperity.
And like Ndp, the Board of Trade is cautioning the government about measures that might do more harm than good.
And it's very important to the St. John's Board of Trade that we do not see mass layoffs or anything else that would negatively shock the economy right now.
But everyone seems to agree that tough decisions have to be made. A fiscal gap of nearly $1 billion cannot be left unchecked. Some feel the pending report of the Economic Recovery Task Force has to serve as a roadmap to recovery. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is not pulling any punches. It's calling for the provincial government to slash employee compensation costs by $600 million, a move that would mean wage rollbacks and the loss of thousands of jobs.
So yes, it's going to be a shock to the system, but it's much better and it's going to be a much lesser shock if we do it now, if the province does it now, than if it waits a couple more years down the road and adds extra interest payments on top.
But that's an unpopular position.
But we're not prepared, as it has happened sometimes in the past, where frontline workers paid a full price and some big business groups walk away doing nothing.
The Premier said Saturday we need to look as far as 10 years down the road to imagine a scenario where we emerge from this fiscal and demographic crisis. The question is whether we have that much time. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, it was quite the upset. Two of the province's three main party leaders didn't win their seats on Saturday. PC leader Ches Crosby hasn't taken reporter questions since before the results were released and hasn't said whether or not he plans to step down. NDP leader Alison Coffin is considering her options, including whether she will request a recount after losing her seat by 53 votes.
There are certainly a lot of options on the table, but remember, we're only 48 hours out. I have to have a lot of conversations about what we can do, what we want to do, and when we want to do that. And everybody else who's been involved in this process needs to take a well-deserved break. We all need to regroup. In the coming few days, we will have a decision.
Now, Coffin says she's heard from several people in the district who never received their ballots. We'll talk about that in my interview with her. That's coming up in about 25 minutes. Well, there are lots of questions about how this election was managed, but we won't be getting any answers from the Chief Electoral Officer, Bruce Chalk, at least not yet. Chalk gave interviews earlier in the campaign to explain changes to the voting process in the delayed election, but we haven't heard anything about how it all went. The Elections NL spokesperson says Chalk won't do interviews now, given the speculation and possibility of court action arising out of this election.
Well, the provincial election had a 48% voter turnout overall. That's the lowest in the province's history. Premier Andrew Furey says there will be a review to modernize the Elections Act, but he's confident the election will hold up as valid. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. So 6 districts had fewer than 40% of eligible voters casting their ballots. 3 of those, so half, are in Labrador, including the district with the lowest overall voter turnout. That's Torngat Mountains, with 22%. Once the election switched to mail-in voting only, candidates in the region raised concerns around accessibility and potential voter suppression. Mail service on the north coast of Labrador is weather-dependent and can be spotty. And Elections Newfoundland and Labrador didn't translate any of the voting materials into Indigenous languages spoken in the region. In 2019, the election, 55% of eligible voters in Torngat Mountains cast their votes. That dropped to 22% on Saturday, so that's a 32-point drop.
Well, PC incumbent Leela Evans won the Torngat Mountains district on Saturday with almost 90% of the vote. She was one of 41 women who ran in the general election, along with one non-binary candidate. That's the highest number to ever run at once. But despite that, more women were not voted into the legislature. 9 women were elected to the House of Assembly on Saturday. That's the same number as before. Jillian Pearson is the co-chair of Equal Voice NL, a nonprofit dedicated to getting more women elected to all levels of office in the country. She ran for the Progressive Conservatives in 2019. Pearson says the parties did a good job of recruiting more women and diverse candidates in the election, even though there was no net gain.
The parties are going to have to look at their own internal structures and say, okay, what can we do to bring more women into the fold earlier and sooner and more properly resourced. That means taking a good hard look at their district association networks. Research shows that if there are more women involved on the grassroots level, they're more likely to produce a woman candidate.
PC candidate Sheila Fitzgerald is apologizing today for sharing racist comments on her Facebook page. Fitzgerald ran in St. Barb L'Anse Meadows on the Northern Peninsula. She also serves as the mayor of Roddickton Bide Arm and as the president of Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, but was on leave during the campaign. After losing this weekend, she shared a post on Facebook condemning the federal and provincial governments. However, the post also contained racist comments about immigration. The post said that governments want to increase the province's population through immigration, and that would be the end of the province's culture. Fitzgerald later deleted the post and wrote an apology on Twitter. She wrote, "I mindlessly shared this post without thinking. The statement about immigration is not a reflection of my values." Municipalities NL also responded, saying that Fitzgerald is on a leave of absence from the organization while she ran in the election campaign. The organization also said the views expressed in the post in no way reflect MNL, our work, or our positions.
And still with politics, a longtime MHA for Mount Pearl has passed away. Neil Windsor was 75. Windsor represented Mount Pearl as a PC in the House of Assembly from 1975 until 1996. He held several cabinet minister posts. He was the Minister of Finance at a time when many public sector workers in the province went on strike. He served under Premiers Frank Moores, Brian Peckford, and Tom Rideout, and in the position under PC leaders Len Sims and Lynn Verge. The PC party says he was also instrumental in helping Mount Pearl become its own city in 1988. Before politics, Windsor worked as an engineer. After politics, he worked for the Association of Professional Engineers. In 2014, Mount Pearl's municipal building was named after him.
While this was the scene in Natwashish earlier today, the military arrived for a medevac. We're told an elder in the community broke her leg and needed to be taken to hospital in Happy Valley Goose Bay for treatment. Members of the community worked together to ensure the woman got to the helicopter safely using a stretcher and snowmobiles. They loaded her aboard the Search and Rescue Griffin helicopter that arrived from CFB Goose Bay, which was able to airlift her to hospital.
The province-wide move to Alert Level 2 means things are getting back to normal in the province's restaurant industry, sort of. Businesses only had a few days to get ready for reopening on Saturday, and as Here Now Cease Hair reports, it's not business as usual for some.
It was like nightmare. It was like a bomb. We didn't know what happened.
Simon Len, originally from Hong Kong, says last April, as the pandemic was bearing down, he opened his new restaurant in Airport Heights. It has survived with curbside takeout, but his plan was for an all-day sit-down service with seating for 48 people. Now, after a 6-week shutdown under Alert Level 2, he can open his dining room to half capacity, but he hasn't, because he says it's hard to find people to wait on tables.
Some people, they got kids, they don't want to take the risk because this is a high-risk position. We having hundreds of people to come pick up their orders, which means they got to face hundreds of people a day.
He says until things are safer, his dining room stays closed to protect his existing staff and family. Rebooting things at the Merchant Tavern in downtown St. John's after a month-and-a-half shutdown meant getting inventory and staff back. But it opened Saturday night.
I just think people are super excited to get out and just, share a meal, have a glass of wine, and, it's great to do that in your own home, but there's something to be said for coming to a restaurant and sitting down and enjoying yourself. So, it was great to see.
Charles says while operating at half capacity isn't ideal, it is good to get staff back and generate some revenue. He believes summer business will get a boost if City Hall brings back the pedestrian mall.
We're looking forward to hopefully having that available again this year. It's made a huge difference, and I just thought it was a great environment for the city as well, you know, and a lot of restaurants and other boutique stores, I think, really benefited from that. So I really hope that that continues.
Charles says something else that should help business this summer is the return of the Atlantic bubble. Cease here, CBC News, St. John's.
There's a live look outside the studio right now. It's windy, it's rainy, and that's pretty much going to continue for the next couple of hours, but I will get into those details when we come back.
Weather update is brought to you by the Healthcare Foundation Home Lottery. Bonus deadline is midnight Friday, April 9th. Order tickets now at hcfhomelottery.ca.
Time for a look at the weather. Ashley is here, and I had a look out the window on my way down to the studio. It is really not nice out there.
It's not nice out there at all. We saw lots of snow earlier today, then that changed over to freezing rain, and now we're just seeing wind and rain. And it's a really nice night to stay inside for sure. Let's take a look at the temperatures across the board. It wasn't nice temperature-wise either, only reaching a high so far in St. John's at 0, but we did see those warmer temperatures towards the south and the west at about 5 to 6 degrees earlier today, and then into those minus single digits across Labrador as well. Temperatures now still pretty much staying the same. We are starting to see a little bit of a drop in those temperatures though for the west coast, down to 2 degrees for Port aux Basques, and same thing for Stephenville. So taking a look at the current sustained winds, seeing a little bit of a break now on the west coast, 48 kilometers per hour for Stephenville, and then 63 in St. John's, 81 for Bonavista, and then those wind gusts are much higher, 89 for St. John's and 104 kilometers per hour for Bonavista. These winds are going to generally continue as we head through the next couple of hours. We'll see a little bit of a break overnight tonight, but as this warm front lifts, we're seeing that heaviest rain right now move across the Avalon. That'll eventually taper off to some showers overnight. And you can see that with the future tracker. So I've left those winds on there for now. So the strongest winds will be now and for the next couple of hours. And then as we head towards midnight, we'll start to see some less winds, about 70 kilometer per hour gusts. So below warning criteria. And then the winds are going to ramp up again on the west coast. We're going to see some the wind shift onshore, and then some snow will develop. So blowing snow certainly going to be an issue as we head through the overnight tonight. And then watching Labrador, the coast of Labrador as well, those winds are going to ramp up towards the early morning hours, and we're going to see those blizzard conditions continue. As far as snowfall amounts go, we're looking at anywhere from 10 to 15, even upwards of 20 centimeters of snow for parts of coastal Labrador. Along the west coast, thinking about 5 centimeters for most, but in those higher elevations, you'll probably pick up maybe 10 to 15 centimeters by the time Tuesday morning rolls around. There are those blizzard warnings, some snowfall warnings from Happy Valley Goose Bay towards the southeast, and then the blowing snow advisories all along the west coast. Those rainfall warnings for the Canagra and Burin Peninsula, those will likely end in the coming hours, if not already. And temperatures tonight will drop right back down into those minus single digits. So things will get a little bit slick overnight tonight. -7 for Corner Brook, -4 for Grand Falls, Windsor. And again, those winds staying, shifting to the northwest on the west coast. So you are going to see that blowing snow overnight. Down to -20 for Lab City. Generally going to see those skies clearing overnight tonight, and then around -14 for Happy Valley Goose Bay. So your temperatures are going to stay well below 0 through the overnight. Left that wind on there for you tomorrow to show you we're going to see the flurry activity in the morning of the light snow. That'll eventually taper off as we head into the afternoon with some potential for some clearing skies. Certainly up through Labrador, you'll see that clear out, and those winds will ease, blowing snow at least for the first half of the day, and then those winds will ease off a little bit. But generally looking at those wind gusts anywhere from 40 to as much as 50 kilometers per hour. And then eventually late day, we'll see some more snow move in into the afternoon and early morning hours. So here's where you'll be sitting temperature-wise, back below 0 or hovering near there for eastern areas. As you head towards central, likely going to see those gray skies continue for Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor, and then towards the west coast, the south coast, as well as the northern peninsula. You'll see a little bit more sunshine in play, but your temperatures will be a little cooler as well. -2 to -5 should be the afternoon highs. Up through Labrador, plenty of sunshine into the afternoon once we start to see those winds ease off. Those westerlies will stick around 40 to 60 kilometers per hour, so it might blow around the snow for a little bit, certainly in those exposed areas. Then you're looking at sunshine in Lab West with a temperature near -6 in Lab City, and those winds generally around 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. So not a whole lot happening as far as wind goes. It actually looks like the ridge of high pressure there is going to set the stage for a quiet couple of days anyway, but I'll get into those details when I come back.
Thanks, Ashley. Quite the saga happening overseas related to a ship that's been stuck.
Yes, a massive cargo ship has been blocking the Suez Canal in Egypt, and today that cargo ship has been refloated and traffic along the narrow waterway resumed.
That's the good news. A team of tugboats managed to free the vessel from the sandy shores of the canal today. The 400-meter-long ship called the Ever Given became wedged diagonally across a portion of that vital trade route during a windstorm last Tuesday.
As close to 400 ships have been held up from passing through the canal. It's a vital shipping route linking Asia and Europe. About $9 billion in trading goods travel through the canal a day.
Wow. And of course, with that big of a disruption, someone on the internet had to poke a little bit of fun. Well, there's a website that now lets you put the Ever Given in any waterway you want and shows you just how big that ship is.
Yeah. And
recognize that harbor?
For sure. Here's the Ever Given. This is how it would look if it was in the Narrows, St. John's Harbor.
Yeah, it would be tight. I've seen some pretty giant cruise ships being able to go through there and docked on the harbor side, so you never know.
Yeah, it might fit. Do you know where this is? Here's a hint. It's on the west coast.
Yeah, a river like that, I'm pretty sure that's got to be the Humber, although I don't think it's getting up much farther than that.
No, for sure. And finally, here is the Ever Given right next to Muskrat Falls. That shows you how the size of the ship compares to the Great Churchill River.
Yeah, lots of wiggle room until you get that mega dam, though perhaps, if it sunk there, it would be sitting right next to the famed U-boat that supposedly lives just below Muskrat Falls, so you never know.
Do not fret for me, my friends. I will be all right.
NDP leader Alison Coffin was not re-elected. What does that mean for her and the NDP? My conversation with Alison Coffin coming up next.
Welcome back to Here and Now. The election campaign was supposed to be 29 days long. It turned into a 69-day campaign. A drawn-out election because of a COVID-19 outbreak. But the results, they weren't drawn out. When Elections Newfoundland and Labrador released the results on Saturday, the final totals came all at once, and we learned that two party leaders had lost their seats. Well, we put together some of the highlights from CBC's election coverage on Saturday, showing how it all played out. We have some results. Let's take a look. The Liberals, 22 seats. And that means we are ready to make an election call. CBC News can now project that Andrew Furey will get his Liberal majority government. This is the reason.
There is no precedent for what we've been through in this past year. Nothing to guide us. But that means now is the time for boldness. Our dire economic outlook was further burdened by the pandemic, and it took a massive toll. But it has also exposed an even bigger opportunity, a chance to make a tectonic shift in who we are and where we're going as a province. It can be a giant step forward. The question is, are we bold enough to take it?
Moving on to Chess Crosby. Well, look at this. Windsor Lake, John Hogan, also a lawyer, same as Chess Crosby, taking this seat from the PC leader. Here's another big one, St. John's East Kitty-Vitty, Alison Coffin, the NDP leader. This is two leaders of two parties losing their seat, not by much.
An election can produce only one government, and the people's right to choose is absolute. That is what democracy means, and I am democracy's most vigorous advocate. So today, I state unequivocally that I respect the will of the people. But let's not forget, in an election, the people choose not only their government, they also choose an official opposition to hold the government's feet to the fire and advocate for people. And it has never been more important than right now to accept this role that the people, in their great wisdom, have placed on this party's shoulders.
Amid a pandemic and a Newfoundland and Labrador winter, we have the lowest voter turnout ever. Thousands more are complaining about the vote. Thousands more, again, are feeling disenfranchised. And there are already speculations about court challenges waiting on the steps of the Supreme Court. After seeing the Liberals manipulate our broken electoral system for their own political gain, I guarantee you that Jim and Jordan are galvanized in ensuring the elections like this will never happen again.
Well, some tough decisions ahead for NDP leader Alison Coffin and her party. She lost her St. John's East Kitty-Vitty seat to Liberal John Abbott by only 53 votes. It's a district that has long been an NDP stronghold. So what's next for the leader? Alison Coffin joins me now. So, Ms. Coffin, you lost by the smallest margin of all of the districts. Will you be looking for a recount?
Not going to say anything definitive right now. There are certainly a lot of options on the table, but remember, we're only 48 hours out. I have to have a lot of conversations about what we can do, what we want to do, and when we want to do that. And everybody else who's been involved in this process needs to take a well-deserved break. We all need to regroup. In the coming few days, we will have a decision. I'll certainly let you know what's going to come next.
Do you have any sense of what the criteria will be that you will be examining? Like, what factors will you be weighing to try to help you make that decision on whether or not to request a recount?
Certainly, we have some idea of some of the things we need to take into consideration. But again, I do need to have the conversations with the people who need to help me make those decisions. We need to have some legal conversations. We need to have some party conversations. So all of those things need to be considered at that time. And once we get into looking at what information we need, we'll get that information and we'll make that decision.
And, you know, the last election, we saw another very tight margin, tighter than this one. Of course, NDP candidate Jordan Brown won in Lab West by a tight margin. It was a 5 vote difference down to a 2 vote difference in the recount. So in the end, the result didn't change. But, you know, the voting format was very different this time around. Voters had to physically write out the name of the candidate of their choice. Do you think that kind of difference could leave room for more interpretation of what votes are counted and what votes are considered spoiled?
Well, absolutely. Every time you add a layer of complication into the process, you add room for a margin of error. So not only did we go from the mail-in ballots, then you had to get on the phone, and then the dates kept changing. So all of the different scenarios that kept playing out, and all of the change that happened, opened up a window for errors to occur and for problems to be included into that system and into the whole electoral process. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole pile of reasons why we do need to get in and examine this in a great deal of detail before any decisions are made.
And, you know, St. John's East Kitty Vidi has long been the safest NDP seat in the province. What do you think the election of Liberal John Abbott says about what voters want right now?
Well, at this point, I think that voters still want to see a new Democratic presence there. Remember, this is a tiny, tiny margin. We had one of the higher voter turnouts. And I can tell you already, many people have already reached out and said, I've not been able to vote. So I think that the voice of New Democrats is still strong here in St. John's East Kitty Vidi. And I have an obligation to them to do whatever I can to continue to represent them. So I think that I think it still speaks quite loudly that the values that are espoused by our party and what I do bring to the party, I think is still a key thing.
Well, what is next for you? You're still deciding whether or not you'll have a recount in this election, but what about you personally? What are you hoping to do next?
Me personally, I have a lot of work to do. When I first became a leader, I said I was here for the New Democratic Party for the next 10 years. I still have a lot to offer for the party. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I am here in whatever capacity and in whatever way, and that my party needs me. And in the coming days, we'll have those conversations about how I can support the party and what my role is.
All right, Allison Coffin, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Well, they've been weighing in throughout the campaign, and after the break, our political veterans will talk about the legitimacy of this election and the success of the independents. The election that seemed like it would never end has ended. Andrew Furey got what he wanted, a majority mandate for the Liberals. Even with all the delays, the switch to mail-in ballots, and the record low voter turnout, the Premier doesn't see any problems with the legitimacy.
I think this is a legitimate election. I think we're going to go ahead. Lawsuits will happen if they happen, but we're going to go ahead and govern.
Well, is it that simple? Let's bring in our political veterans. Sandy Collins is a former PC cabinet minister, Jerry Rogers, former NDP leader, and Colin Holloway, a former Liberal MHA. So, first of all, Sandy, let's start with you. Is it as simple as all that?
You know, I guess it's what people are willing to accept. And I don't think generally, and I can't speak for everyone obviously, but I don't think people, the electorate that just went through a 10-week campaign, want to be thrust back into litigation and court challenges that dominate the news and dominate this province for weeks and months ahead. However, you know, elections have to be transparent, they have to be accountable, they have to ensure access. And some of those questions around those topics aren't really clear. So I think we need some answers on those. I'd prefer to see outside parties push that and maybe take care of that on the side while political parties get back to work and start doing the people's work. But I think some questions obviously do have to be answered and make sure it never happens again.
Colin, we saw the Canadian Civil Liberties Association today say they're not going to weigh in on this. They're just going to let the results lie. So where do you think this challenge might come from then?
Well, I'm not really sure that there's going to be a challenge, to be honest. You asked at the start, is you know, using the words like legitimacy, is that, you know, the right approach? I would say to Mr. Furey that I wouldn't even focus on that language right now. I think in an earlier statement this morning, he talked about that he was going to address the Elections Act. I think having election reform is something that's been on the agenda for a nice while. I think Mr. Furey and this government should focus on that as well. You know, there was really no change, and to get to your question, there was no change in the number of female candidates. I think the status quo. I think for Mr. Furey, he's going to need to take a look at that. If he wants groups not to challenge whether this election was legitimate or not, and I think if he focuses on some of this legislative change, even if there is a challenge in the courts may say, yeah, okay, it might be an argument here, but I see that the government is taking steps to correct that. And so it may take someone to win that as sales.
Jerry, we saw that the NDP leader today was kind of sort of hedging her bets. There hasn't been a decision made. Her race, where she lost, was the closest race with just over 50 votes separating her from John Abbott. So do you think that the NDP should be challenging this in court?
Well, I think it's certainly something to look at. I myself, in a period of just a few hours, heard of 4 people that I know who didn't get their ballots, even though they had tried very, very hard to get their ballots on that fateful Friday. I was astounded, absolutely astounded by the language of the Premier and by the language of the co-chairs for the Liberal Party when they said they were ecstatic about the outcome, and how they can see this as a bona fide mandate when 48% of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, only 48% voted. And then the Liberals got 23% of the votes, not 23% of all of, you know, they got 23% of the eligible votes. And they call that a strong mandate, and they were ecstatic. As a matter of fact, they should be really concerned.
One of the other interesting storylines that we saw out of Election Day was 3 independents elected. Never before have we seen that many independents. This is a province where people traditionally support one of the 2 main parties or the NDP. And I'm curious about this because we've now had 2 elections with 2 or more independents being elected. Colin, let's start with you. Is this a sign that the public is more interested or more willing to give independents a choice? What do you think here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bigger issue at play here. So you just think about those 3 independents. So you had Eddie Joyce, who was a longtime Liberal, but came out of caucus, came out of cabinet. You have Paul Lane, who actually sat with the Progressive Conservatives. He, in 2015, went over to the Liberals. And then within that first year, and it was a budgetary issue in terms of how he was going to vote. And so he goes over and sits as an independent. And now you have Perry Trimper. So Perry Trimper, the issue was about comments he made, racial comments in Labrador. And so he came out of cabinet, came out of caucus, and yet 3 of them can be elected. And I think for Andrew Furey, who has to do a lot of work in Labrador, if he's going to think that even beyond, into the next election, because there's a lot of work to be done with the Indigenous group. I know he said this morning that, one of the things he recognized in this election that, ballots and voter information wasn't being translated, and he's going to address that. That's a good step forward, but I think he's quickly realizing that he has to do a lot of work in Labrador, and people like Perry Trimper, who, regardless of making comments that got him out of the Liberal Party, was still able to be elected. And that is a big statement. So for Andrew Furey and the Liberals, they've got a lot of work to do with the Independents, and they really need to bring the Independents on side for some of these bold steps that Andrew Furey talked about on Saturday that he needs to make over the next few months, next few years. And so I think balance of power, there's a fair amount of power within those independents.
Sandy, how much power does this give backbench MHAs and parties? Because traditionally the idea is everyone kind of wants to, toe the party line, because otherwise you get kicked out and then you have no support and you can never get elected. So does this allow backbenchers to kind of push back a little bit and the parties kind of have to keep them happy, or they're afraid that they may go and sit as independents?
Yeah, I think it absolutely has changed the water on the beams for backbenchers in particular. We know that party politics has lots of ugly bumps, particularly when you're in a governing party, and Colin had mentioned it, and both Colin and myself know what that's like, and there's an expectation with towing party lines and getting in line. And I think the electorate, sees through that, and they want to elect people that can make the choice based on what the right decision is rather than what the party stance is. And you have 3 individuals now who can do that. And I think it absolutely, it's a shot across the bow of all parties, basically saying, allow backbenchers, allow all members of your party to have their say and to be able to speak freely, because otherwise it can take a bad turn, and you can see what happens there, and where the numbers are so tight with regards to the governing party not having that many more seats. If you have a couple people leave caucus, that changes things immensely, and the balance of power.
And Jerry, I'll leave the final word to you.
Well, I think that the government's hold on power right now is a little bit tenuous. It's almost status quo. And they're really going to have to work together. And ideally, that government will work together with the other parties. We're in a really tough position here in our province. There's going to be a lot of big decisions made, a lot of decisions made quickly. And now more than ever, everybody's going to have to work together for the best interests of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. That's the task ahead.
Well, thank you very much for joining us again, all 3 of you, for your insights. Always appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
The trial of the former police officer charged in the death of George Floyd is underway in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Opening arguments started today.
You can believe your eyes that it's a homicide, it's murder.
Derek Chauvin is charged with murder and manslaughter in Floyd's death last summer. He knelt on Floyd's neck for nearly 10 minutes until Floyd went limp. The defense argues Chauvin acted appropriately because Floyd was resisting arrest. Chauvin is facing up to 40 years in prison if he's convicted. Floyd's death sparked sometimes violent protests across the U.S. and demonstrations worldwide. The final report into last year's deadly crash of a Canadian Forces Snowbird jet has been released. The plane went down shortly after takeoff in Kamloops, BC last May. There were 2 members of the Royal Canadian Air Force on board. The report says a small bird was sucked into the engine during takeoff, causing a loss of power. The pilot followed procedure and put the jet into a steep climb. This is done to give the pilot time to regain control or to safely eject. But then the pilot turned back toward the airport in an apparent attempt to avoid a nearby residential area. That created further problems, and the pilot ordered ejection from the plane despite the low altitude. The pilot, Captain Richard McDougall, was injured. Captain Jennifer Casey, a public affairs officer with the Snowbirds, was killed.
Welcome back to Here Now. Before we get to Ashley's weather, let's wind down the show with this.
Yes, it looks like a farm with horses, cows, pigs, and chickens, but the 15-year-old who started the Little Red Barn Micro Sanctuary says she wants the sanctuary to also teach people compassion for farm animals, and she has big plans.
I've never seen cowboys, so I'm interested. The Little Red Barn Micro Sanctuary is a place where children and families can come to meet farm animals and make the connection that they are someone and not something. You want to moo into the microphone for us? So we offer many different programs here where people can come and meet the animals, such as our compassion tours and we have a program called Zen Bovine, which helps people with anxiety. It has a very calming effect to hang out with the cows. This is Serenity. She is one of our oldest residents that we have here. What inspired me to start the sanctuary was I actually did a research project in grade 8 to see if you could teach children empathy and compassion towards farm animals. I wanted to create a safe and happy environment where they could come and connect with farm animals on an individual basis. Well, here at the Little Red Barn, we take care of cats as well as dogs, not just farm animals. All the animals here have been rescued. Sometimes we have hobby farmers who love their animals so much and they want them to have a safe and happy life where they are cared for, as well as we partner with farmers to rescue their animals after their retirement. Well, all of our animals have free range of the whole property, so they get to do what they want and behave how they would in a natural environment. This is a day in the life of the Little Red Barn for sure. It's really important for us and to the animals that they have names and individual care, because each one of them is special and each one of them means something to us. This is Scotty. Right here is Ellie. Sunny, I have to say, looks like a little unicorn. Hanging out with these animals gives me the absolute best feeling. My long-term goal for the Little Red Barn Sanctuary is something we have actually started this year, which is to develop a presence in school systems where we can really help children learn about farm animals and meet them in a way that they probably haven't done before.
How lovely was that? But not so lovely was the beginning of the week weather-wise. Some stormy conditions for sure today. Things are going to quiet down, though, as we head towards the midweek. Take a look at these temperatures. 10 degrees in Corner Brook, 5 in Grand Falls. Winds are a little bit cooler as you head a little bit further east, but it does look like plenty of sunshine. A little bit unsettled up through portions of Labrador, certainly the Lab West as well as the north. As you hover around the 0-degree mark, we could see some freezing rain in play there. So the reason for the nice weather is a ridge of high pressure. That's going to move out, though, as we head into the afternoon on Wednesday, and then we start to get some unsettled conditions for Labrador, as I just showed you, and that will generally continue through the day on Thursday. We'll see some heavier snow move in. That rain-snow line will sink a little bit further south, and we start to get into some unsettled conditions Thursday night into Friday. Now, depending on how close this low gets, looks like it kind of stalls a little while, but we could see some rain on the west coast as we head through Thursday into the beginning of Friday. Temperatures will start to climb, though. We're going to see those double-digit temperatures return for most of the province, except along the south coast as you get into on that onshore flow. About 5 degrees, and then again the potential for some showers, but some sunshine. And at this point I have 7 degrees for St. John's. We could see those temperatures bump up a little bit more. And then hovering below 0 for the west and northern portion of Labrador, but then getting into those single-digit temperatures on the plus side of the mercury for central and southeastern. So as we head through the week, we're going to see that big jump in temperatures thanks to some ridging, and that will peak as we head into Friday. So some of the warmest temperatures will be Friday. We'll see it for the first half of Saturday, and then back into some of those cooler temperatures as we head into the beginning of next week. There's where you'll be sitting. Again, these temperatures might be a little bit low. We could see them bump up a few more degrees, 7 to 10 degrees for Friday, a little bit more cloud cover in play, and then by Saturday things look a little bit unsettled with the potential for some showers. As we head towards central, we're looking at a similar forecast as far as those big jump in temperatures. We could see 11, 12, maybe even 13 degrees as the afternoon high, so certainly welcome. That's the same thing for western Newfoundland. That's unsettled weather. Looks like it'll happen on Saturday. It might happen on Friday, but at this point, that's what it's looking like. For eastern Labrador, you're looking at unsettled conditions for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, but back up into those single-digit temperatures, and then a little bit cooler for Lab West, but by Saturday, you'll be hovering around 1 degree. Wanted to share this photo, sunset in Witless Bay. Thank you to Christine for that lovely shot. If you have any weather photos, send them to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
Red sky at night, sailor's delight.
That's right.
Beautiful colors.
Great shot.
Blizzard on Monday, nobody's delight.
And loving those temperatures later on in the week. It sounds like it's going to be quite a nice end to the week.
I will melt, or I will. The snow, all that snow will melt.
Good.
And that's it for us. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.